An elderly black man, hair silver, walked into the courtroom with a limp. His hands were cuffed. His coat was frayed at the shoulders. His shoes had holes in the soles. The charge: disturbing the peace. The reason? He had sat behind a coffee shop where the vent blew out warm air, just to keep warm on a night when the temperature had dropped to 5 below zero. No one in that courtroom knew. The man trembling before them, head bowed in shame, was once Staff Sergeant Jeremiah King of the United States Marine Corps, a soldier who had charged through enemy fire in Fallujah, Iraq, to save the life of a young lieutenant. No one recognized the eyes that once held steady on the battlefield, now hollow, distant, belonging to a homeless man forgotten by time. When the court clerk asked for his name, he raised his head. Jeremiah King, Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. His voice shook slightly, but rang out like a command. People saw only a frail old man being prosecuted for disorderly conduct, but they didn't know that this was the same man who once established order in a place where life and death were separated by the sound of a single bullet, and the moment that would leave the entire courtroom in stunned silence hadn't even happened yet. Watch until the end, because you're about to witness how a man the world tried to forget made the justice system bow its head. Judge Camille Dawson sat behind the large oak bench, eyes fixed on the case file in front of her. She was known for being strict, fair, unshakable, until her eyes landed on a name, one so familiar it sent a chill down her spine: Jeremiah King. The pen in her hand froze. Her fingers trembled slightly. She flipped through the next few pages faster. Military record, Fallujah, medals, a command, a single name: Jeremiah King, Staff Sergeant. The same name her late brother, Lieutenant Michael Dawson, had written in his final letter before he was killed in action. The soldier who had charged through gunfire and carried her brother out of an ambush, the man she had searched for over the past 20 years, was now sitting silently in her courtroom, in handcuffs, branded a criminal. At that very moment, the courtroom doors opened. A man in a suit walked in, calm and deliberate. "Your Honor, my name is Julian Reed. I've just been appointed to represent Mr. Jeremiah King." Heads turned, all eyes on him. Jeremiah looked up, stunned. I don't have money for a lawyer." Julian gave a small nod. "And you won't need any. We're taking this case pro bono." From a homeless veteran treated like a public burden, in that moment Jeremiah King was no longer invisible. He became a living memory, a witness to war, a promise left unfulfilled, and the one man about to turn this entire courtroom upside down. Before he became the old man loitering behind a coffee shop, Jeremiah King was once the pride of the United States Marine Corps. He had led a squad in Fallujah, charging into gunfire, pulling his brothers out from mortar fire. He had earned the Silver Star. He had once been featured in the press as a quiet hero. But after the war came a different kind of battle. This time there were no bullets, only wounds no one could see. The diagnosis: PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. He couldn't sleep, couldn't hold a job. His emotions were out of control. His ability to connect with others, gone. His wife couldn't take it anymore. She left after a brutal argument. His apartment was foreclosed, buried under unpaid bills. His applications for unemployment and veteran benefits got lost in a bureaucratic maze no one helped him navigate. No money, no home, no one left. From a war zone rescuer, he became a shadow, huddled next to a dumpster, clutching his torn Marine jacket like the last piece of himself that still made sense. No one remembered his name. No one asked for his story. They just saw some old man causing a scene behind a coffee shop, and called the cops. But what they didn't know was this. The man they pushed away that day had once stood in front of bullets for this very country. And because he no longer wore the uniform, they stopped seeing him with the eyes of gratitude. As Jeremiah King stood in silence beneath the cold fluorescent lights of the courtroom on the bench above him, Judge Camille Dawson was fighting a storm of her own. She quietly flipped through the case file until a familiar line stopped her cold. Staff Sergeant Jeremiah King, United States Marine Corps, Fallujah, Iraq, 2004. The pen slipped from her hand and clattered onto the desk. It couldn't be. It couldn't be that name. She rose abruptly and stepped into her private chambers. On an old bookshelf sat a small box, holding just one thing: the final letter from her brother, Lieutenant Nathan Dawson. He had written it to their family just 3 days before he was killed in action. Camille had kept it for over 20 years, a silent reminder that some letter never made trembling. And when she reached the line, "There's a staff sergeant named King who ran through enemy fire to pull me out of the kill zone. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be writing this right now." Her heart clenched. King was Jeremiah King, the man she had quietly searched for over 2 decades, to thank him on behalf of the parents who never got the chance, the man who once saved her family from unspeakable loss, now sat before her in court as a forgotten defendant. Camille glanced through the tiny glass window and saw him, head bowed, wrists still marked from the cuffs, and one haunting question echoed in her chest. How could a man like that end up here? The young prosecutor, tie perfectly knotted, posture confident, spoke clearly before the court. "Your Honor, the defendant, Jeremiah King, has repeatedly trespassed on private property. We request a restraining order that bars him from all areas within the downtown district." But behind those seemingly lawful words was a silent sentence. No more access to the church kitchen serving free dinners. No more shelter at the warming station on cold nights. No more sitting behind the coffee shop, where a kind-hearted cook once left him half a sandwich in secret. Judge Camille Dawson kept her expression composed, but under the bench, her hand clenched tightly. And Jeremiah? He sat still, alone, without a lawyer. No one to speak for him. The fluorescent lights cast a pale glare on his worn military coat, as if exposing the weight of isolation he carried. He didn't protest, didn't complain. He simply answered softly, "I just needed a place where I wouldn't freeze to death. I didn't ask for money. I didn't cause trouble. Just a wall and half a sandwich." But the law had no space for truths that raw. No one in that courtroom asked, why is the man who once saved American soldiers now begging for a place to stay behind a coffee shop? Justice that day was too busy with statutes, protocols, and cold legal language. Too busy to remember that the man on trial was once the reason others are still alive. The courtroom remained silent. Only the soft rustle of turning pages and the anxious breathing of those present broke the stillness. Suddenly, a man stood up from the audience. He wore a Veterans of Foreign Wars jacket, his shoulders square, eyes sharp, like time had done nothing to dull what he once saw. "Your Honor." His voice echoed, deep, steady, full of weight. "That man, Jeremiah King, saved 6 of us. I was there that day, in Fallujah. I watched him run through gunfire to drag each one of us out." Heads turned. The entire courtroom froze. The prosecutor stood, fumbling to object. But Judge Camille raised her hand. "Silence, please." She turned to the man who had just spoken. "Please state your name." "Sergeant William Graves, United States Marine Corps, Charlie Unit, 2nd Battalion, West Fallujah sector, April 2004. And in that moment, in a courtroom packed with people holding their breath, Jeremiah King lifted his head. Not in pride, but in surprise. Surprise that after 2 decades of being invisible, someone still remembered. The heaviness in the room cracked, ever so slightly, as if something had shifted, not within the justice system, but within the hearts of those present. Sergeant Graves continued, voice trembling now. If it hadn't been for him that day, my son wouldn't have a father, my wife wouldn't have a husband, and I wouldn't still be alive. In a moment that felt like history might finally make things right. Justice turned its back. The prosecutor, face still cold behind his wire-rimmed glasses, stood and spoke with precision. Your Honor, while Mr. Jeremiah King may have served in the military, that has no bearing on this case. The past does not exempt someone from breaking the law. The courtroom stirred in shock. William Graves, the veteran who had just spoken, clenched his fists, his eyes burning with restrained fury. But Jeremiah, he simply bowed his head. No protest, no anger, because he was used to it. Used to the system that once pinned medals on his chest, being the same one that now slapped on handcuffs for sitting behind a coffee shop to stay warm. 20 years of service, 2 war zones, a Silver Star, now reduced to 3 violation slips. Loitering, refusing to vacate, seeking warmth without permission. Beneath that tattered military coat, Jeremiah's chest still carried scars, not from bullets, but from being forgotten. His old file read, exceptional. Steel resolve, saved fellow soldiers. But today's report said, homeless, disturbance, minor resistance upon arrest. Each cold sentence stripped him, not of rights, but of recognition. Turned a decorated hero into a faded name on a city violation board. They forgot something critical. Sacrifice does not come with an expiration date, and honor should never be erased just because the man carrying it is shivering open in the winter cold. Every head turned. Judge Camille Dawson stepped in, not alone. Behind her walked 3 uniformed military officers, a colonel, a sergeant, and a private first class, holding in his hands a polished wooden box, engraved with the seal of the United States Navy. The entire room held its breath. Camille walked straight to the bench. Her voice was steady, but for those paying attention, her hands were trembling slightly. Before this court proceeds, she said, I'd like to share something personal, but necessary. She turned to Jeremiah. Lieutenant Jack Dawson, the name listed in your military records, was my brother. Every eye in the room shifted toward Jeremiah King, the man who had sat silent for the entire hearing, now slowly raising his head, eyes worn by time, yet clear. You saved my brother's life, Camille said. You gave my family 2 more weeks to hear his laugh, to get his calls, to read his letters. 2 weeks no thank you could ever repay. She gave a signal. The colonel stepped forward. He opened the box. Inside, the Navy Cross, the 2nd highest combat honor in the U.S. military, just below the Medal of Honor. By order of the United States Department of the Navy, the colonel read, the Navy Cross is hereby awarded to Staff Sergeant Jeremiah King for extraordinary heroism under fire in the rescue of fellow Marines in Fallujah on April 17, 2004. The courtroom was frozen in awe. Then, one soldier stood, then another, and another, until the entire gallery, every service member, every spectator, rose to their feet. They stood at attention and raised their hands in salute. No more accusations, no more dismissive glances, no more silence, only quiet, collective reverence for a man they had nearly left behind. Jeremiah King stood still at the center of the courtroom. The Navy Cross now rested in the palm of his hand, heavy with memory, but somehow lighter than the years he had spent being forgotten. No one said a word, but one by one, people began to rise. A veteran in the back row stood and saluted. An elderly woman placed a trembling hand over her heart, eyes brimming. Even the young prosecutor, the same one who had asked for the restraining order, stood slowly, eyes red, and raised his hand in a formal military salute. The courtroom felt less like a hearing, and more like a memorial service. No music, no ceremony, just silence, soaked in respect. Judge Camille drew a long breath. Her voice rang out, firm and clear. All charges against Staff Sergeant Jeremiah King are hereby dismissed. Your military and civilian records will be fully restored. All benefits, housing, pension, health care, will be reinstated retroactively from the day of discharge. A wave of applause erupted. This time, no one held back. From the crowd, a middle-aged man stepped forward, flour still on his apron. He raised a paper-wrapped sandwich, the same kind Jeremiah had been eating when he was arrested. "My name's Jimmy. My father was a soldier. He used to say, 'If you ever meet Jeremiah King, remember, our whole family owes him a lifetime.'" Jimmy gripped Jeremiah's hand tightly. "Today, I get to repay a piece of that debt with a bow, and a gratitude words can't hold." Jeremiah smiled. Not wide, not loud, a slow, quiet smile, but one that cracked open the heart of every person in the room. Because sometimes, glory doesn't need applause. Sometimes, it just needs to be seen. Jeremiah King never asked to be honored. He didn't walk into that courtroom hoping to be seen as a hero. All he needed was a quiet corner, a little warmth, half a sandwich, and a world that wouldn't forget him. But his story uncovered something far greater, that in every city, every back alley, there are men and women who once sacrificed everything, but now live as if they never existed. Not because they are weak, but because we've grown too used to honoring people only on paper, in speeches, on stages, a specialist in veteran policy. Put it plainly, Jeremiah King is living proof. Not all heroes are remembered with parades. Some just need to be heard, believed, and recognized as human. This story isn't just about a medal, it's about compassion. A nameless cook who left behind half a sandwich, a judge who reopened an old letter, a veteran who stood up in silence. Each small act led to an outcome no one expected, and it taught us something. Justice isn't just written in law books. It lives in every glance, every decision, every moment we choose to remember or to forget. Jeremiah wasn't saved by a title. He was saved by human kindness. Because in the end, as one journalist once wrote, it wasn't because he was a soldier. It was because he was a man who deserved to be seen, to be remembered, and to live. Late in the afternoon, the last rays of sunlight poured into the quiet little room. On the pale gray wall, a Navy cross shimmered gently, framed in simple wood. Jeremiah King sat silently in an old armchair, his eyes resting on a weathered mailbox on the table nearby. Inside it, letters, handwritten, ink smudged by time. They were letters from Lieutenant Daniel Dawson, the late brother of Judge Camille. Camille gently placed the final letter in Jeremiah's hands. "My brother once wrote about the soldier he respected most," she said softly. "The one man, if given the chance to live again, he'd still choose to stand beside in any battle. And that man was you, Jeremiah." Jeremiah gripped the trembling paper, the familiar handwriting now transformed into something far greater than memory, a witness to a promise once buried, now awakened. Just outside his new veteran housing apartment, a freshly mounted brass plaque gleamed on the stone wall. No soldier left behind, no dignity forgotten. Jeremiah looked up at the words. He didn't speak, but in his eyes was everything left unspoken. The pain, the pride, and finally, the healing. Because some battles aren't fought to win. They're fought to keep a promise. And in the community of those who once bore arms for others, that promise is always kept.